Hey everybody, today we're doing another video where I walk you through some puzzles and we're going to go over my thought process a little bit as we do. I'm going to start a puzzle rush on survival and we're going to do puzzles up until, let's say, the 2000 rating. Now even if that does sound like an intimidating number, you're going to see it's actually pretty simple to achieve if you really just take your time and focus on all your options before making your moves. Now let's get started. Okay, now for the first few examples, I imagine they're going to go relatively fast because there's just not much to say about them. They're most likely going to be mate in ones. Now as we can see here, our knight covers the h7 square, which is really the only escape square for the king. Now if we bring the rook to h8, that's a checkmate. So there goes the first one. Now here, black is trying to kick our knight away, but we have a very nice checkmate here. To give you a visual aid, the highlighted squares are the ones controlled by our pieces. So if you find a way to attack on the dark square, it's checkmate. And that move, as I'm sure you already saw, is bishop to b4. Okay, moving on. Again here, it's a pretty basic checkmate pattern. The black pawn keeps the white king stuck on the first rank, and then, oh, look at that, rook to e1 is your checkmate. Okay, now here, we can see a blunder from black in this puzzle. In this position, they should have taken our rook with check, but instead they got greedy and they took the free knight. Now by doing that, they allow us a back rank mate. There you go. Now, okay, again, we have a checkmate in one. Our queen is supported by the knight. Right there. Now this is yet another back rank mate. Our pawn defends the c7 square. The only challenge in this puzzle is that black can block the initial check with rook to g8. But it's a simple queen take, and afterward, we take the rook. Alright, now, as I said, the first ones are simple mate in ones. Alright, another back rank mate. Nothing really more to add here. Alright, again, we see our rook controls the G file, keeping the king stuck on the H file. And we have another mate in one with rook to H7. Alright, now from this point, I think it's safe to say that the difficulty starts to increase a little bit. Now this is a checkmate in two move now. The king is stuck here. We can't start with rook to H3 because they just capture us, but we can start with pawn to G5 and then follow up with rook to h3. Now you're going to see this pattern quite a lot when doing Puzzle Rush. Pause the video for a bit if you want to solve it yourself. Now white proposes a queen trade, but you cannot accept this because you're down a bishop and you also have a checkmate in three moves. We need to check on f2. White is then forced to h1, and due to the battery on the f file, we can sacrifice the queen for the victory. Okay, we got another checkmate in one move. The only difference here is that we can't play queen to h1 because we'd get captured by the knight. But we can play queen to h2 and deliver the mate. Okay, so for this new puzzle, we see that we can bring our rook to help on b7. Now, if they block with rook to d7, we play queen to d7. And if not, then queen to f7 is mate because the rook will now be on b7, which supports our queen on f7. Okay, here we got another checkmate in one move. I'll give you guys a few seconds to solve this one yourselves. Okay, we see that black is stuck on the e file. They can't go to the f file because their pawn just blocked the path, and our pawn protects the f3 square. So, as you already found out, rook to e7 is mate. Now I think things are starting to get a little more educational. This is where we kind of start to learn things. We see that we don't have any direct checkmates or captures. Now another important aspect of chess is creating threats. And in this position, we can bring our rook to f1, creating a mating threat on h1. White's only save is to move the g pawn, but if they do that, they'd allow another checkmate with rook to e2. Okay, this one is another pretty simple checkmate. We have a check right here, and then a mate on h4. Oh, and here's another checkmate in one move. Okay, now if you're wondering why these are so repetitive, the idea at the lower ELO level is to make you look at the entire board as a whole and strictly avoid tunnel vision. Now you see Black's last move was knight to g3, but you're not forced to respond to it. Instead, you can checkmate your opponent right here on d7. Okay, now this one's a pretty simple skewer. We see that the rook and the king are on the same rank, so by capturing on h4, we can take the rook next turn. Alright, let's see our next challenge. Black to move and apparently win a piece. We have this check, and with the knight moving, we see that our bishop can attack their bishop. If we take the knight and they recapture with the pawn, we can take the bishop because it's check. So white is forced to escape the check first, meaning we won't leave our queen hanging. If they take with their queen, we'd trade queens, and only after that take the bishop. Alright, so black is stuck yet again. Now we just need to find a way to deliver a checkmate on the dark squares. We see that our bishop could get the job done, and even though black can defend with pawn to g5, we have another rook ready to bring us the win. Alright, let's see what we have here. Black is attacking our queen. Alright, have you guys heard of the phrase, the best defense is a good offense? This is a prime example of that. We see that we can play knight to e5 and attack their queen as well, but if they take the queen, we'll capture theirs, and now both of their rooks are going to be under attack, winning us in exchange. Also, the great thing about the knight to e5 is that it attacks both the queen and the rook on c4. So if black moves the queen first, we're still going to be up in exchange. Okay, now this one kind of hits home. We've done so many endgame studies, I'd be pretty disappointed if you can't solve this one. Even though black has 3 pawns, white is much closer to promoting. The problem is, if you make a random move, black is going to be able to move to g8 and block the promotion square. Now this is why white needs to move king to h7 first to secure that promotion square. And only after that can we start pushing the pawns. Okay, so these puzzles are definitely starting to get a little more difficult. We see that we have this check right here, but that they can block us with rook to f8. So what do we do next? Pause the video if you want to challenge yourself. Okay, we see that we have this check on e8, and they'll block it with rook to f8. If we look at the board, we see that even though white is down a knight, black is practically down a rook because their rook is stuck on a8, and they need to move it to activate it. Now to solve this puzzle, we're going to have to take advantage of that. But how do we do it? Now remember, we have a rook on e8, and black has a rook on f8. So we're going to exchange rooks, and black is going to be forced to recapture, bringing their king over to f8. Now with the king on f8, white can play queen to b4, forking the king and the pawn on b7. And now after black defends against the check, white will capture the rook. Okay, again, useless pieces, useless, all of them. We see that the queen controls the 6th rank in its entirety, so this should be a checkmate in 2 moves. You bring the bishop to f4, and then queen to d6 for a mate. Nothing too complicated here. Alright, now here I'm going to give you guys a couple seconds. We see that our queen is attacked twice, and we can't take the rook because it's guarded by the queen. Or can we? We also see that we have a fork on c7, so I'll let you guys decide which is the best move here. Take the rook, and after that take the queen back with the knight to c7, or first play knight to c7. The queen is going to be forced to take, and then you take the rook. Now in this position, I think the best move is to force the queen trade. At the moment, the material is equal, but we know we're going to end up a rook up. And what do we want to do when we're up material? Exactly. We want to go into the endgame as soon as possible. So that's why I think the correct solution here is to force the queen trade first. Okay, here we see that white was dead lost this game, but black just handed white the victory on a silver platter. Now again, we're going to take advantage of the king's position, stuck here on h8, and our queen can mate on h6. Now, I don't know why this is such a highly rated puzzle, maybe because some people would instinctively play queen to f6 here, but if you check on f6, black would be able to save the game because black is forced to defend with rook to g7. Now we don't have checkmate anymore on h6, as black could move the king to g8. If he blocked with the rook instead, again, white would have a checkmate on f8 this time, but no, it ends up being a pretty simple checkmate. Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. I do not need to explain this one, right? Come on. I mean, if you don't know this one, please just unsubscribe at this point. I'm not even going to comment on this one. Okay, white is 2 squares away from promotion, and we've kind of boxed the king over there. So, what's the thought process here? We don't have any immediate checks. We don't have any good captures, because if we take here, maybe white can capture here, or he'd just push the pawn. In these kinds of positions, we see that white's pieces are just too far away from his king. He's going to have a hard time coming over to defend him. So black's pieces are much better placed to deliver an effective attack. And we see that we can create a checkmate threat with bishop on e4. Now white's only defense is bishop to f1. But after we take the bishop, white has no other way of stopping the mate. Maybe he'd go to g3, but we can play queen to g2. The king's only option is to g3. And then we have queen to g5, checkmate. Okay, on to the next one. Oh, pause the video here if you want to challenge yourself a little bit, because we can see the same motif once more. Even though we're down one rook, white's pieces are more active and have a much better placement. Also, black's rook is useless, just stuck over here. Now again, the king is stuck in a corner, but how do we mate him? We can see that we can start with queen to h5, but then black can simply defend with pawn to h6. Also, if you're trying to create a mating net with bishop to c4, unfortunately, this move is going to be way too slow. Here, black has multiple ways of defending, maybe a queen check, maybe pawn to g6. In these kinds of positions, you should think in forcing moves. Now we can see that sacking the rook almost forces the king to take it, and if he takes it, we have queen to h5 check, king to g8, bishop to e4 check. Black is forced to block it with the rook. Queen to f7, king to h7, queen to h5, mate. Now if black doesn't take the rook and moves to g8, we'd sack the rook once again on h8, and eventually we'd arrive in the same position. Okay, this one is a pretty famous checkmate pattern. It's called Damiano's mate. I also have a video about this if you guys are interested in checking it out. Basically, we can see that our pawn on g6 does a great job of controlling the f7 and h7 squares. Now our end goal is to checkmate with our queen on h7, so how do we force that? As I said, we can't waste any moves with queen to h5 because black is eventually going to be able to save this. So we need to start with this rook sack on h8, forcing black to take us. We follow with queen to h5, forcing black once again to move his king to g8. And we have queen to h7, checkmate. Now here we see that we have a discovery check, and this puzzle, the challenge is really just where to move the knight. Now there's only two options worth analyzing in my opinion. It is knight to d6 and knight to h6. Now what's the difference? Well, if we check on d6, they can't capture our knight because it's double attacked. So the only option is to escape the check by moving his king. With the knight on d6, we're also defending the e8 square, which leaves black with only three options to move the king: g8, e7, or e6. Now after the knight moves, we see that we can continue with queen to f7. And now we should calculate where the king could move. Now I think the best defense for black is to first escape the check on g8, and after the queen check on f7, to move to h7 in order to defend his rook, and white's attack would just die there. Now we don't really have a continuation anymore, so we'd waste that discovery check pretty much for nothing. So what about the other option, which was h6? By moving there, now our knight would restrict black from going to h8, forcing black to the e file. And we see that bringing our queen next to f7 is actually going to be a checkmate, so there you go. Now here we go with another endgame puzzle, and at this point you guys should essentially be masters of this. The problem we see here is that white is only 1 square away from promoting. Now we're also attacked on the a file, and black is 2 squares away from promoting. But if we push, the white king can go to e2. So how should we tackle this one? Now, first things first, you need to stop that promotion. It's fairly obvious. So your first move should be king to g7. Now, even if this position looks visually impossible, it's a pretty easy win for black because his bishop does an incredible job of both stopping white's pawn from promoting if white ever decides to push to a7 and keeping the white king away from black's pawns. Now, allowing black's king to deal with white's pawn, and after that, escorting his pawn to promotion. White's only move to approach the pawn is to first move the e-pawn and attack it through the e4 square. But if the white king ever goes behind the pawn, black is simply going to push it, and white is not going to be able to catch it at all. Now, knowing that white can't ever catch our pawn, white can take black's pawns without any concern. Now, as we said, his only way of attacking the pawn is via the e4 square, but if he goes there, we can promote the pawn, and if white pushes the pawn instead, the king is inside the box and can easily stop the white pawn from promoting. White still can't push the a-pawn because the bishop is going to take it without breaking his defensive barrier. So yep, that's pretty much a loss. Now, as I said, it's all according to our calculation, and now white is not going to be able to catch our pawn. Alright, this next one I think is fairly easy. The one before was a bit more challenging. This, again, is a back rank checkmate, so I'll let you guys think about it for a couple seconds first. We can see that black's bishop stops white's king from escaping through h3, so black should find a way to deliver checkmate. Now, the challenging part is that black can't start with queen to a1 because white can defend with rook to d1, and you can't take the rook because it's protected by the bishop on f3. So we can see that the problem is that white has two defenders over the d1 square, and black only has one attacker. But by looking at the board in its initial position, we can see that our queen attacks the d1 square too. So if we start with the rook instead of the queen, black is going to have two attackers over the d1 square as well, and would be able to overtake white and mate him. Okay, let's look at this position a little bit. Now we see that we can take the bishop with the pawn, but the white queen is just going to recapture, and then what? This pawn is definitely troublesome, and we do have to deal with that. Also, our king is really kind of exposed here. Now white can trade queens, and he has a better position than us, so even if we take the bishop, that doesn't really help us very much. In this position, we can create a checkmate threat. We take advantage of this open file, and we can bring the queen over to the h file. Now, the challenging part of this puzzle is where to actually move the queen, h5 or h6, and is there really any difference between them? Now pause the video for a little while if you want, and let me know in the comments if you were able to figure it out. Okay, now after staring at this board for way too long, I'm convinced that the only winning move in this puzzle for white is queen to h5. Because even if both moves look similar, with the same checkmate threat on h2, in the h6 case, white can actually save the game by moving the rook to e1. Now the move would make an escape square for his king, so if we came to h2, the white king can escape to f1 and to e2 afterward if we move queen to h3. But if we start with queen to h5, white can't defend like that anymore. After rook to e1, black wouldn't play queen to h2, but instead take the bishop with the pawn, cutting the white king's access to e2 while removing the defender on the h1 square. And now, white has to give up his queen if they want to prolong the game, for a few more moves anyway. Otherwise, queen to h1 is mate. Okay, another endgame puzzle. We should all be very good at these by now. It's black's turn to move and win the game. The challenge here is that white is one square away from promoting, which is why he proposes a rook trade. Now, if you accept the trade, he's going to promote next turn, so what do we do now? Let me give you a little hint. Once again, we take advantage of the king's position. Now, the correct move is actually to accept this rook trade, because if you look at the board, you can see that technically you don't have any way of stopping that pawn from promoting without sacrificing your rook. But if you look at the white king's position, you can see that he's on the h file, and he'd promote to the g file. So, if we check him with the rook from behind, he'd be forced to move to the g file, and once he moves there, we can skewer his king and queen, and we'd promote our pawn in the next two moves. Alright, here we go with another one. What do we have here? taking a look at this position, I guess the endgame result would be to trade all the pieces and end up in a better position, because I can see that black is already one knight up, and his a-pawn can run freely and promote. Now, even if we have this powerful battery over here, we can't take the knight because it's double protected, so I think the first move here might be a little obvious. I think it's to take the rook. Black takes with the knight, and we check with the queen on d8. Now, let's see some potential outcomes here. We take here, he takes back. Queen to d8 check. Black defends with rook to f8. Now with that move, black also defends his knights, so I think queen to e7 is almost an unstoppable checkmate threat. He can't interfere with his knight, because we can simply take it with the rook. So black should give up the queen as well if he wants to survive this, and we're going to go into a winning endgame with queen versus rook. Okay, but what if he defends with king to g7 instead? Well, if he does that, we can take the rook with a check and collect the knight afterward. But the question is that the winning move or not? Let me think about this one for a minute. Okay, if he pushes the pawn, I can come to a7, and if he moves to f8, I can force a queen trade on c5. But no, that's definitely going to lose the game. Now you see how the king can enter the square, and he can catch our pawn. So this isn't it. Let's look for other alternatives. Okay, let me think. So we capture, he takes queen to d8, king to g7. Oh, I see it now. Okay. We can actually play queen to f6 check. The queen is protected by the pawn, and black's rook is pinned by our rook on a1. So that's going to be a forced checkmate in 3 moves. Okay, but hold on. Now I'm thinking, what if he doesn't take back and plays king to g7 right away? I think we can still play queen to d8 and force a checkmate. Yeah, queen to d8 is definitely the move. I think those are all of his defensive resources, and we have a solution for all of them, basically. So let's see how this unfolds. Okay, so he does take it with the knight. Oh, he goes with rook to f8, as we thought earlier. And as we said, queen to e7. Now he's got to give up his queen in the end. Alright, so judging by the ratings here, this is probably going to be the last one. Now let's see what we got. Okay, we got 3 attackers, but the problem is he's also got 3 defenders, so this isn't it. Looking at the position, the first thing that comes to mind is rook to g3 check. He can't go anywhere here, so he's got to defend with his knight or his bishop. And what's next? We can't sacrifice the rook, because he'd still have 2 defenders over the g6 square due to his pawn. Did you guys figure this one out? We see that he can't checkmate on f8 because black has 3 defenders, but we see that the f7 square only has 1 defender. The bishop on h5. So, if we find a way to distract him, we could deliver a queen checkmate, but how the hell are we going to do that? Actually, we've already done that with our previous calculation, which was rook to g3. We said that black can defend either with his bishop or his knight. Now, if he defends with the bishop, then we can play queen to f7 because the bishop is going to be pinned and can't take us. Now, if he defends with the knight, we could play queen to f7 because the knight would interfere with the bishop's defense. So it's actually pretty straightforward. Okay, I said that was the last one, but this one seems pretty easy too. Pretty straightforward checkmate. I'd say queen to h6 and then rook to c8. I don't know why this one's so highly rated, but let me double check because it's considered a 1976. Queen to h6, his only square is g8. Rook to c8, he can't stop us. Yeah, that's it. Simple. Alright, so yeah, here we've reached 2000. I think I'm going to do a separate video for 2000 and up because things are starting to get a little more complex, and I should probably dive a little bit deeper into each individual puzzle. So yeah, if you want to see that video, let me know in the comments. I really hope you guys learned a couple techniques from this one. You should have already nailed a couple of these because of all the endgames we've done in the past. But let me know what you'd like to see in our future videos, and we'll get to them. See you next time.